everyone. Welcome to my channel. If you don't know me, my name is Neosha. I go by Ifa Fumilayo Egbe Bumi, and I am a spiritual practitioner of Hoodoo and Ifa or Isheshe. Um, I am also uh, you know, a metaphysical, spiritual type of person. So um, before there was any religion in my life, I was always what you would consider a clairvoyant type of person. And so I tend to lean heavily on that part of my personality. So that being said, I talk on my channel about a little bit of everything. And it's not limited to just one way of thinking or one thought process. If you'd like to hear more ideas and the things that I have to say through channeled messages and just life experiences, you can click on my channel and subscribe and like this video so that I know that there are people who are interested in what I have to say. You can join me on my other video platforms on TikTok as Mother's Mystic Water, and you can join me on Instagram also as Mother's Mystic Water, and Facebook as Mother's Mystic Water or Watchers. So yeah, today I just wanted to actually talk about um, near-death experiences. Um, and just my experience in general with how I dealt with mine. I've had at least three. And when I say at least, it's because my near death experiences were not typical. One was the typical type of experience, and the others were not. So we'll get into that. But my first near death experience in the hospital was when I was giving birth. So I have twins, and my twins came early. So they delivered at 7 months or 32 weeks. And they are 3 hours apart. So that morning of their birth, my water had broken. Um, Before that, like I'll give you all a little backstory, but before that, before my labor started, I was in a very abusive, physically abusive relationship with their father. Um, and I won't even call it a relationship because it was more of something else, which is a hard story to get into. But for now, we'll just call it a relationship. So at that time, I was just in a lot of stress. I had been told by the doctors that I needed to do bed rest because it was very difficult for me to walk. And I wasn't really big. I wasn't like the typical um, person, a pregnant woman carrying twins. I barely looked like I was probably about 5 months pregnant, but I had two babies. Um, and so when I went into labor, they were trying to stop the labor. They didn't want me to go into labor because obviously I was very early. The first twin, there were some underlying issues there with the babies themselves. So the doctors would tell me that they probably would not survive the birth. Um, and so um, I'm sorry, my brain is thinking on so many different aspects because there's so many different offshoots to these stories. So to this story that make stories. So my mind is like trying to reel them back as I'm talking to you. But so at that time when I went into labor, the first twin, my water broke. And so they rushed me into the ER. At that time, I was breached. Both babies were breached. Um, and because they had not started to turn yet. And so, because of the hospital that I was delivering at, they had a lot of student doctors. And so I was asked if um, they could witness um, the birth. So there were about maybe 25 people in the labor and delivery room with me, as well as the father of my children and my mother. And so um, I remember first twin came. They had to deliver her breech. I did not get a C-section. And then the other twin, the sac had not broken. So they were saying like we can try to um, stop the labor. And so that's what they did. They put me back into a room, took me out of the delivery room, put me back into a room, and I lay there in excruciating pain. Um, and I kept crying. I remember crying, and I remember saying, what's happening? And they kept telling me, well, we're trying to stop the labor. If the baby doesn't need to come, we want to try to keep her, in gestation. And so I remember thinking, I just want it no longer was in my mind a baby. It was just a thing because it was hurting so badly. And I remember saying, get it out. I just want it out, get it out. And they were like, no, it's not time. You're fine. It's not time. And so I lay there. And 3 hours later, um, she proceeded to push through. Um, and so the nurse came up to me, and I kept saying, I need you to get this out of me. It's time. She's there. So the nurse felt down there, and she was like, oh my God, you're right. And so she um, caught it and took me back into the delivery room. And because they had prior known issues, which was a kidney disease that was genetic on the father's side, so they knew that they were not producing enough water and amniotic fluid and whatnot. So um, they kept saying that they probably would not be born alive, right? And so they had already rushed the first twin into the um, the baby ICU. They had put her in a incubator, those little clear beds, right? Clear caged beds. Um, and so I remember laying on the table, and they kept putting oxygen on my face. And I don't know, but the weirdest thing is that I felt like this oxygen was more like gas. And I kept saying, pushing it away, and the man kept putting it back on my face, and I kept pushing it away. And I'm trying to push um, the baby out, and as I'm trying to push the baby out, he's putting the oxygen back on my face. I'm pushing it away, and this happens several times. And finally, um, he stops. because I keep saying, I don't want it, I don't want it. And so, because I felt like it was making me lose consciousness. When I look back on it now, making and connecting the dots, I don't think I was so much losing consciousness from the air, but I think I was just losing consciousness, period. Um, and I was losing a lot of blood. So in between the time that I had had the first twin and that 3 hour span, I was just bleeding, bleeding, bleeding. And they weren't just taking the baby, they were trying to make labor stop. And so I remember just this kind of euphoric feeling. And if anyone who has ever had a very strong medication or painkiller, that's how it felt. It felt like I was just kind of floating, and it was just very euphoric at some point. And I think that the pain and the trauma of the childbirth was just too intense. And at some point, I separated from my body. And so I remember um, at the point where I started to push the oxygen away the last time, I started to float up. And next thing I know, I was on the ceiling. And as I was on the ceiling, I it didn't feel like anything. Like I was very aware of myself. I was very aware of me and my thought. The space was very gray, like empty space. It kind of reminded me of the television um, back in the days where when the static would come on at midnight, they would turn the TV off for everyone, and then it would just, or I don't know if it was midnight or sometime in the early wee hours of the morning, but it would just be empty space and static. And that's what it reminded me of, just this very gray, empty space with a very soft electrical current. Um, I wasn't puzzled by it. I wasn't fascinated by it. I didn't question it. I do remember looking down and seeing my body laying on the table, or a body laying on the table, because I was not really connected to the fact that that was my body. It was just a scene that was happening. And so I remember seeing the doctors standing around me. And then I'm looking around again, and all of a sudden I have this thought of, hey, you need to go back to your body. You can't be up here. You need to go back to your body. And I went back to my body. And as I gained full consciousness back into my body, everything went back like it was. Now, how much time that was, if it was recorded that I my heart stopped for a couple of minutes, or a minute, or 2 minutes, or 15 minutes, I don't know. No one ever said anything to me, doctor wise, and I didn't ask. And it just felt like it was a couple of seconds or so. So I'm really not sure um, if they would have considered something legally gone, right? If I would be considered legally not there. But nevertheless, it happened. Um, that was my first experience, and first near death experience. Now, my second near death experience, um, So this is the hard part, because I think that there are some points in time where we have near death experiences, and we choose to um, take an alternate reality. We choose to take an alternate turn in our lives. And at that time, my life was so traumatic, and I was dealing with so much abuse. Um, and so, with my children's father, he was, I had just gotten one of my twins home from the hospital. She had stayed in the hospital for a month, and the other one that came second, um, we'll call her Baby B, so I won't just be using their names because I'm trying to keep their privacy, right? Baby B was in the hospital for a good 3 or 4 months, and so because she stayed in the womb so long, that she had a lot more health issues, and because she was born early, so she was on an intubator and given oxygen and things like that. Um, and so at that time, their father was seeing another woman who did not know that I had was pregnant or that I had given birth. But that particular day, she had called up to the house and looking for him, and someone answered the phone and told her that, oh yeah, she's at the hospital having her babies, and the woman was livid. So I had um, my baby A with me, and this was in the month of November, and so it was really cold. I remember it was super cold, and I had been walking every day to the hospital because we didn't have a car. Um, and so everything was just very traumatic. And so I had this newborn baby. I'm 22 years old, and I'm just out there, right? And so I remember coming home and one day from the hospital, and he is in a rage, and I'm thinking, okay, what's wrong? Because you know, when you're with a very narcissistic, abusive, bipolar, borderline schizophrenic type of person, you never really know what you did. You never really know what triggered this particular episode, right? And so, whatever is in their mind, you are the brunt of. You are the person who will receive, um, that backlash. And so, um, he says to me, in a rage, he's yelling and he's saying, "I'm tired of this shit," and just really just very irate. And I'm saying, "Well, what's wrong?" And he's saying, "Well, um, you're harassing so and so, and this is the other woman." And I say, "I don't know what you're talking about. Mind you, I've lost all this blood. I'm weak. I'm anemic. It's the dead middle of winter, and I have a newborn baby at home and a newborn baby in the hospital, and I'm walking every day to the hospital to visit her in the NICU." And so I'm like, "Ugh, what?" And so she was intentionally creating some friction and drama to stir the pot. And so he came in and he basically held me hostage in a room for hours. Um, and when I finally did get a chance to kind of like break away, I said, "I'm leaving. which women, this is the biggest mistake that you could ever make in your life, is to tell a man that you especially know to be this way, an abuser or abuser, to tell him that you're leaving. And it nearly cost me my life. Um, and so when I said that, he took out a pum pum, and he held it to my head. And he's threatening me, right? And telling me that I'm not going anywhere and I'm not leaving with his kids. And um, yeah. And so as he's doing this, I'm sitting in the chair holding my baby, right? And I'm trying to guard my baby. Um, and he's um, just hitting me and slapping me and having waving this pum pum in my face. And I'm trying not to say the word, but y'all know what I mean. And so um, it misfired. Just as he was getting ready to put it back towards my face, it misfired. So he's doing like this, and it goes off. There's a television sitting on a dresser to my left, and so um, it it hits the television and shatters the television, so everything flies back into my face. So I have this um, glass spraying into my face, and I'm doing this because I'm trying to protect my child, right? And so um, it shocked him. It really shocked him. I don't think that he um, really thought that that would happen. And so at that point, there was something that left me. There was something that happened and triggered inside of me that is very difficult to explain, but the best way that I can put it is that um, life didn't matter at that moment. It didn't, like where I was living in pure fear and torment over this person and underneath this person, I was no longer feeling um, that fear. It just, something broke inside of me, and I said to myself, no, you know, if you're going to kill me, then you kill me. And this is where manifestation, I believe, where manifestation happened, because I believe that I manifested a new reality in this point. Um, I believe that there's a part of my soul that went somewhere else into a very similar reality, but very altered. Um, and so I did not necessarily have what you will call the near death experience of floating out of my body, or seeing, you know, gateways and spirals, or, things like that, or any beings meeting me and ancestors meeting me. It was none of that. But I was very aware that a shift took place. Um, and so, because I am a clairvoyant person, I'm very extra sensitive. And so, because of this, I am very aware of both worlds existing. I'm very aware of my placement and how I interact with both worlds. It took me a long time to get to that point, um, but I've become very comfortable with that dynamic, right? I've become very comfortable with understanding it. Um, and so my third experience was very recently. And um, I had surgery. And when I came out of surgery, um, I was in the recovery room, and then they brought me to a room, and I was in the room for a few minutes, not long, maybe 10, 15 minutes or so, maybe a little longer. But I realized that I had to use the bathroom. So I asked the aide that was working in the room if I could go to the restroom. He said, okay, and he helped me out of the bed, helped me get to the bathroom, told me to hang on to the chain if I needed him. Um, and I said, okay, sat down, used the bathroom. When I went to stand up, everything went somewhere else. And the best way that I could explain it is that I felt like I was on dropping from a building, from a 50-foot building, I don't know, as if I were on some type of roller coaster or something. And so, and I could feel everything just going away, and I could not stand any longer. My legs were leaving from underneath me. And so he called for help, and they got me back to the bed. And I remember the aide, and there was a male nurse and a female nurse. And the way that they stood over me and watched me was so intense. And again, there was this feeling of not fear. It's like, okay, it used to be a time in life where I was afraid of death in general. I wouldn't even talk about it. I wouldn't go to people's funerals. I wouldn't. It was just weird to me. It was creepy to me, and it was scary to me. It was mostly scary. And so now I'm at a point in life where I'm like, what can I do? If it happens, it happens, right? And so that was the kind of feeling that was happening in the hospital at that time. It was like, well, you know, um, and so I looked into the male nurse's face, and he was standing to my left. And I looked at him, and I kind of just, it was almost telepathic. Um, like, okay, here we are, and it was like he responded with, "I got you," and he gave me a smile. Um, and then I looked back over at the other nurse who was on the right side of me at the machine that takes the vitals and monitors your heart, right? And then they immediately inverted me upside down, because my heart rate had dropped down to like 40 something, 40. I don't know. I just remember them saying it had dropped really low. And so they inverted me, kind of tilted me back, and then my heart rate settled back down. But I could tell that they were standing in crash mode. Like, if something happens, we're on it. And so then they explained to me, yeah, when you were in surgery, your heart rate was really high. Your blood pressure was really high, so we gave you some medication that would bring it down. Now, the medication that they used to bring me down, I had a reaction to it once before, but I didn't think to tell them, like, hey, this medicine I've had a reaction to. Um, and I don't know if it's just, they calculate it by your weight. And I don't know if for me that is just too much, or if it's just actually an allergic reaction. I don't know, but um, it was not the first time that I had a bad response to that particular medicine. So the nurses in this story are very pertinent or important to this story right now because um, let's see, a few months later, um, I had went on a trip. Me and my husband went on a trip because I had a family member that had passed away, and I had not been home in a really long time. And I have some really strong regrets and remorse at not having been home in such a long time. And when I did go home, it was only for like, a couple of days, and then I left again, and I didn't come back again for a really long time. And this particular cousin was like a sister to me. We grew up together, but she always kept tabs on me. She always checked on me. We talked all the time on the phone, but I felt guilty at not really participating in her life, and I knew that she was sick. Um, so when I went back home, and I had avoided home for a lot of reasons, because I always felt like I wasn't loved enough. I felt like I was always pushed to the side, that I wasn't accepted as a family member. And this particular cousin, she embraced me always. And so um, when I went back home, I was taking, when you go home, you take your husband or you take your friend or whoever is with you, and you want them to see, oh, I went to school here, and this is where we played here, and this is the house we lived in, this is where I grew up, so I'm doing that with my husband, and I'm having so many revelations, right? And so to the point where I say to my husband, am I dead? Like I feel like maybe I'm not really here. And he was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I feel like I'm having a life review. Like I feel like there are so many things that I'm coming face to face with, and I'm feeling, and and I'm like, why did I feel that way about that after all this time I stayed away, and look how this really was, or and I was like, I feel like I'm having a life review, and all these memories flooding back, and all these things that and I could not remember. Like a lot of people will ask me, hey, you remember we did such and such or so and so, and like I don't remember. I don't remember my a whole lot of my childhood at all. I remember certain events, but just memories like conversations, or I don't remember. um, And so, but as I'm having this visitation, I'm having this whole flood of things, and I'm saying to my husband, like, this feels so surreal. I don't know. Um, I don't feel grounded in reality at this moment, because I feel like I'm having a life review. And then he's like, just listening to me, and I said, the crazy thing is that, there's a saying that we entertain angels unaware. And so um, it's just hitting me and hitting me. And if anyone, on here knows my husband, who knows, but he's a very pleasing person. So he's like, what can I do for you? Let me move this for you. Don't pick this up. I got you. Are you okay? How can I, and so I always say God sent me an angel, because I had been through so much trauma. Um, and so for me, my husband now is just that guardian angel. And I said, I feel like I'm going through a life review, and you are my angel. You are the person who is showing me all these things and saying it's okay, and, having me look at things in a more positive light, or an alternative way to look at things. So we go through that. We come home, um, and my husband had me go pick up something from one of the neighbors. So my husband has, we have a neighbor who had passed away unexpectedly, and his family members are really old. And so my husband has been like maintaining the yard and stuff for them. He's like, no, I'll just do it. Don't worry about it. And so, life sends you confirmations on a lot of things. You just have to be patient and take your time to listen. But as I went over there and the man comes out of the house, I had never met him before. He comes out of the house and he hands me the items that he was given to my husband. And he says, Duran is such a lovely person. He's like, what do you call them people? What do you call them? What do you call them? Like a guardian angel. And I just kind of looked, and I was like, okay. So come back in the house and do my thing. Maybe a day or so later, I was sick. I had gotten sick, and I think it was from the flight back. But whatever. And so I, I have the worst headache that I've ever had, and I'm like, why can't I get rid of this headache? Um, and I've got a cold and a cough. I'm congested. My ears are congested, and just sick. So I'm laying in the bed taking medication, cold medications and stuff, and I go into what I call an out of body or altered state, right? So it's almost like when you're laying on the couch and you know what's happening around you, but sleep paralysis, almost like that. But in this particular altered state, um, it's like a dream state, but I'm very aware of it, of what's happening in this dream. I'm very much in control of present in this dream, right? And so in the dream, my husband knocks on the bedroom door and he says, hey, I have some old friends that I want you to meet. And I'm saying, babe, I'm really sick. I don't really feel good. I don't want to talk to anybody right now. He's like, oh, but they've come so far, and they're really old friends, and they won't, they may not be back. They're in town now. I just want you to meet them. It'll just be a little bit. And I was like, okay. So they come in, and it's two women. Um, and in my bedroom, everything is the same. In my dream, in my bedroom, everything is the same. So they come into the bedroom. They sit down at the table in the bedroom. So the two women here, my husband in the back, and they're talking. When you have old friends, you reminisce and whatnot. So they're talking. But the ladies, one in particular, never took her eyes off me. She never took her eyes off me. And there's a spirit back here that keeps distracting my eye. But she never takes her eyes off me. And I as they're talking, she's so intense. And there's three in this dream. There's three, right? And in the hospital, there's three. And these energies or these spirits are the same spirits I believe were operating in that hospital environment. But this is how spirit works in the physical and in the spiritual. So we are manifesting these. So they're the very same spirits. I can feel the energy. I'm connecting to the energy, right? And once I connect to that understanding, like, she's waiting for something. The way she's looking at me, she's waiting to see what's going to happen, or if something is going to happen. And so that intensity wakes me up. So when I get up out of my sleep, I say, oh, like, so I go and I take my blood pressure. My blood pressure is sky high. And so I'm sure I was probably at stroke level. I took some blood pressure medicine and kind of just laid down. But what I realized in that moment was in the dream, my husband was not the man that was saying, the man in my dream that was my husband was actually another spirit as well, but he came in the form of my husband so that I would not be afraid and that I would accept them comfortably in. But they were trying to energetically um, raise me out of um, danger. Um, and so that was my, um, I would say, third near death um, experience. And, you know, and so now that I've had so many of these different experiences, and I know that my energy is able to leave at will. So now I go in and out at will. So when people talk about near death experiences and channeling, they're really very much in alignment with each other. Um, and I am able to pull out messages in that way. But I've always been that way. It did not necessarily come with channeling. I mean, come with a near-death experience, but it came with me just accepting who I was. Um, because for so long I tried to disacknowledge or not acknowledge that part of me. Um, because it was weird, right? It was something that people are not going to understand this. If I say this, nobody's going to know what I'm talking about, or people are going to think I'm crazy. I did come from a household full of people who were very aware of things like that. Um, they may have not explained it in the same way um, as us or as I'm explaining it to you. But I came from a family like that, and I think most, as far as I know, African Americans, they may not talk about it, but because of Christianity, it's been kind of labeled as taboo. But it exists very strong in the Black community. Um, you know, I think that being able to acknowledge now has been probably a greater gift than it ever has been because now um, I can be more present with myself and then in turn be more present with others. And I can give others that gift of what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like. Um, and so, yeah, so those were parts of my near death experiences and what has been able to help me to understand life in general. So I think that my biggest takeaway that I'd like to give to you all is that we live in a near death experience at every moment, all day, every day, and that our layers of reality are in overlapping each other. They're folding within each other. Um, and it's just really being able to become aware of how those layers interact with each other um, and what those layers look like. Um, it is not just in our waking state. It is, in our sleeping state. It's in our waking state as well. And I think that if we really take time to analyze some of the things that are happening in our lives, we'll have a greater understanding of how our destiny looks and how we should proceed with it. But, there are those who would prefer not to know and live in kind of this blissful ignorance, and not ignorance in a bad way. It's just that sometimes it's easier not to know, because, you know, with knowing comes responsibility. And it is a heavy responsibility to bear, um, for those of us who have taken the dive to go, onto the other side. Um, but it's not spooky. It can be spooky, but, you know, once we kind of fully embrace it, um, it becomes less and less spooky. So anyway, I hope that helps whoever it helps. It's been fun talking with you all today. And again, if you like, my topics and you'd like to hear more, please click on the subscribe button and share and like. And until next time, I will see you soon. Love, peace, and light.